So, why are we here? Because home ownership is a big part of the Kiwi dream. Getting on that property ladder makes a difference. Just how much of a difference, I hear you ask? Well, let's just say 50 Shades of Grey was only romantic because that dude had a very fancy penthouse. If he was in a trailer park, that would have been an episode of Police 107, right? Now, I'm a very big fan of real estate. Buying houses, selling houses, renovating houses. Oh, I'm a sucker for the punishment. But I'm also living proof that you don't need a big bankroll to get in the property market. This place we actually bought last year for under $400,000 on Waiheke. And yes, it is a Skyline garage. And so Kiwi, eh? And in just a few months, with some elbow grease, we were able to turn it into this. A little bit more, oh yeah. It's a little spot, it has vineyard views, and now we do short-term rentals with romantic folk like yourself. Now, although we're going to be hearing from some real experts very shortly, I thought I'd pass on some things I've learnt over the years buying property and also watching Ellen. Let's take a look at some of the ads I found. Oh, hello. Okay. This one says home with potential. You've got to look out for that word, potential, because it means the yellow mould could potentially turn into black mould. Let's see, the next one. Oh, one of a kind. There's another red flag, because the builder only ever made one. He's probably in prison, being sued, and he can't make any more. This one says cosy one-bedroom unit. Now, cosy means teeny tiny, like teeny tiny. If you are the person that likes the middle seat on the aeroplane, this is for you. And very quickly, classic means old. Retro means old. Original means old. Good bones, old bones. And tricky, newer, means about to be old. Right, well, that is my cheat sheet for real estate lingo. Now you're ready to be passed over to the experts. First, I would love to introduce you to the BNZ Director of Retail and Marketing, Paul Carter.
Well, thank you, Amber, and good evening, everybody. So I was at my children's parent-teacher interview last night, and they said potential and one of a kind. So I'm now coming here. I'm not sure I got the message right on reflection. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first ever Buying Outside the Box event that we've ever had. Now, at the Bank of New Zealand, we are very passionate about our mission of helping New Zealanders be good with money so they can go and do great things with it. Now, one of the great things we can do with our money, and Amber, what great examples you've given about how we can get onto the property ladder and property ownership. But one of the things we've also been doing at BNZ is some research in this area, and we've noticed some pretty interesting emerging trends. And that's where this Kiwi ingenuity is coming to the fore in how people are getting into property ownership. So we're seeing a couple of things. First of all, more and more of us are thinking about the first house we buy as one that we'll never intend to live in. So an investment property as the first place we buy. Another trend that we're seeing more and more is we're pitching in with family and friends to save for that first deposit. So co-ownership or shared ownership models. So it's some pretty interesting new trends. And so that gets to the core of why we are here tonight. And we've got a bunch of customers and people that we know are interested in getting into homes. And some of them have been very generous with their time, sharing their stories with us. And so, Ben, good to see you here tonight. Ben and his wife, Michaela. Now, you told me that in the space of a month, you graduated, you got engaged, and you bought your first house and got a job all within a month's time. Now, that's pretty impressive. But you and Michaela are undertaking a new build. We've spoken to sisters, Maddie and Bridget, who have pulled their money together to get that first house. We've spoken to newlyweds, Paige and Sam, who have bought an investment property in Tauranga while they're renting in Auckland as a way of getting onto the property ladder. And engaged couple, Amy and Scott, who have bought an apartment off the plan. There's their first way into property ownership. All of these stories have helped inform us about, well, both the challenges and the warts and all version of some of the challenges that go in with getting onto that property ladder. So tonight is all about connecting our customers with the experts. Now, I'm not the expert. I'm going to have Amber back in a minute to introduce you to the experts about the tips and advice we can provide on how to best navigate this, because ultimately it comes back to that mission I referenced up front about what we can do to help you be good with money so you can go and do great things with it. So I hope you enjoy the evening. Save up all these questions as we have our experts, because we'll have plenty of time at the end to make sure your questions are addressed. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Amber to introduce our experts. Thanks.
Great stuff, thank you, Paul. Right, well, let's get into it. Our first speaker, Tony Alexander, has been employed as Chief Economist at the Bank of New Zealand. Tony is very passionate about helping younger people become property owners in an era where it seems almost impossible to do so. Please put your hands together for Tony.
Rightio, look, thanks very much for that, Amber, and thanks everybody for coming along this evening. This morning I was in Waikato talking to a bunch of about 200 plumbers down there, and basically giving a very lovely outlook for themselves, saying you're all going to be very busy over the next few years, not enough houses exist in New Zealand, there's going to be very strong construction growth, and your bigger problem is going to be how do you find staff. So I had sort of a mixed message for themselves there. And I suppose for yourselves this evening, my message is also a mixed one, in that sitting here, if you haven't already made a purchase, you want me to say it was a bubble, the surging Auckland house prices, and they're now about to fall by 10, 20, 30%, and so just hold off and then make a purchase and everything's going to be sweet. Well, let me just say that anybody over the past sort of 3 decades that I've been in this business analysing the New Zealand economy who has predicted a significant fall in New Zealand house prices, and especially the past 8 or 9 years, has been completely 100% wrong. And all those economists who were given the advice from 2009 in particular of, oh, it's a bubble, just wait, things are going to get cheaper, and encouraged you to hold off, well, they gave you bad advice, because now we have this massive queue of people who put off buying maybe in 07 and 08, high interest rates, recession, didn't buy from 09 through to 2012 because they were getting these stories of, yeah, prices are still going to fall, they're still going to fall, keep waiting, keep waiting. Now, on top of yourselves, there's this extra queue of people trying to do some catch-up buying. And what I've tried to emphasise to people over the past few years is that there are some, I guess, a very long list of reasons why house prices are rising. Now, I'm going to give you some Googling references here. One of them is Tony Alexander, 19 Reasons. And that'll take you to one of the many articles I wrote, I think in 2011 or 2012, as to why Auckland house prices in particular would keep on rising. So this isn't me sort of making up a story at the moment to try and make it sound like I was on the right track. There's actually proof of it back there. And there's some really long-term stuff in here as to why housing is now permanently more expensive than it was before. One is that we have females who have entered the workforce from the 1970s, the 1980s. Prior to that, if there was somebody at an auction bidding for a house for their family, they were paying a price on the basis of one wage coming into the household. Now there are invariably 2 wages / salaries coming into the household. Naturally, that gets factored into house prices. Back in the early days there, 1970s, before that, the average size of a new house being built was around about 120 square metres. Now it's something like 190, 200. These days, the toilets are on the inside, and maybe there's more than one toilet. There's actually something in the walls, called insulation that didn't exist in the 40s, the 50s, sort of 60s houses. The houses have to meet standards for insulation, energy efficiency, earthquake preparedness. The materials are tested. Developers are paying fees. There's consenting levies, all these sorts of things to pay that say the house that's being built these days is completely different from the house that was being built in the past. there's also extra people out there buying property now. We've seen from about 25 years ago in New Zealand, the government and many agencies issuing warnings about the sustainability of superannuation and that people needed to start preparing for their retirement. And when these messages first started coming out in the late 80s, 90s, the memory fresh in the minds of all of us was the 1987 share market crash. Yes, I want to prepare for my retirement, but I don't think I'm going to do it through shares. Now, if you had, you'd be quids in. The markets have risen tremendously, over a long period of time. People naturally started gravitating towards housing investment. Up to the 1980s, if somebody was investing in housing, usually that was all they did. They had 20, 30, 40 of them, and that was their thing. We didn't get so many individual investors. Now, of course, we have many average Kiwis thinking, this is a perfectly normal thing to do. I'm going to become a property investor. On top of that, housing markets around the world have become internationalised. Around the world, there are people from other countries that buy properties in their market. And up until, the 2000s, we really didn't talk about either Indian buyers, Australian buyers, UK, Chinese or whatever, coming in and buying houses. Now we have these extra cohorts of people out there adding to the housing demand. We've also had a structural decline in interest rates. The big one was in the early 1990s. Now we've just had another one over the past few years. We've had inflation settle at lower levels, interest rates falling back to the lowest levels now since the 1960s. And this is where it gets exceedingly ironic that for somebody like me, my first house purchase was in September 1987. And if you remember your history, that was 1 month before the share market crash, so not so good on the timing. I paid 18.5%. I was better off than you at the moment looking to make a purchase and maybe paying 4.49%, 2-year fixed BNZ, I think is the rate we've got at the moment. I was better off back then. But when I was thinking about this, as I was getting my notes together for this talk a few days ago, I thought the nature of sacrifice. Back then, my sacrifice in terms of what I was spending on, cutting back on spending things, it happened after I'd made the purchase. I only needed a 10% deposit, and I did that by getting 4 credit cards, running them up to their limit, and going along to my bank saying, here, I've got a deposit, sure, let me buy a house. My sacrifice was sleeping on a disused sort of couch there, this old couch for 6 months afterwards, cutting back on major spending, because with an 18.5% interest rate, any bit you get off the principal, it's a big bonus, basically, so that's when I've made my sacrifice. Your sacrifice is shifted in time because now you do need to get yourself a deposit, 10, 15, 20%. And of course, the price is so much higher. So while sure, repay your principal once you've got your house, etc. But for you, the challenge is sacrificing before you've even made the purchase. And here's where it gets really, really interesting. Because back in my day, sacrificing meant don't go down to the pub so often, don't take up smoking, don't go and waste it all on the horsies or some sort of nefarious habits out there, and that was the sacrifice. These days, the things you would have to sacrifice or can sacrifice mean you're sort of stepping aside from what's considered to be a normal person in the modern environment. You see, people like me, we judge what we think you should be sacrificing on the basis of what I did not have in 1987. I didn't have broadband. I didn't have Sky TV or Netflix to be paying for. I wasn't spending, as I calculated 3 years, I was spending $6,000 a year going to cafes. I've stopped that now, not so good for my local cafe, but too bad. Eating out, we did that maybe 2 or 3 times a year, birthday, anniversary, something like that. Whereas we humans on the planet, we eat out all the time now. And of course, drinking basically meant you went down to the sort of the bush inn at Riccarton Road there in Canterbury University, some big booze barn basically. Now you've got this great range of beautiful bars out there to partake of, and your beer is $10 or $15 a pop. I mean, I just laugh. I just think, why don't you go to the supermarket, pick up half a dozen or so? But that's not the new normal. The extent to which you have to make a sacrifice these days, it's been glibly put as, avoiding the smashed avocado. I don't really know what that is. Avocado has no taste for me. It varies from people, so I've never purchased it. But you have to sacrifice more, and you now have to do it before the purchase. That's where getting into KiwiSaver is a very good idea, and increasingly that's what people are looking to make their first purchase. Now, I've run through a bit of a list there, like I say, of some of the long-term factors contributing to the house prices being permanently higher. Let me throw in two relatively important ones of relevance here, especially in Auckland. One of them is migration flows. Up until the 2000s, we talked about brain drain from New Zealand. Will the last one out turn off the light? We fully expected that our kids would go overseas. If they weren't going to be a vet, a farmer, or work in a grocery shop or something, then they should go overseas, quite frankly. And in the 10 years leading up to 1977 to 86, on average, each year, New Zealand lost 17,000 people through migration flows, 17,000 net. In the 10 years to 1996, we gained 3,000 per annum. In the 10 years to 2006, we gained 11,000 on average per annum. In the past 10 years, we've gained on average 28,000 per annum. New Zealand now holds on to its young people, and that's what Auckland does. Auckland is what we call New Zealand's agglomeration. In this age of technology that we are in, where most of us can work remotely, you can't work remotely because the speed at which the business environment is changing means you need to be interacting with other people very, very frequently, very, very quickly, people from a massive range of diversified backgrounds. They know that's technology, that technology. You develop ideas quickly, put them in the market, watch them fail, get the big data analysis, etc., redo them, put them out again. You can't do that if you've got staff members in Ekatahuna, Riverton, Edgecombe, all over the show. The world is not so much urbanising from paddy fields into cities, it's agglomerising. Whatever big city you're in, you're going to the next bigger one. And that means growth in London, it means growth in New York, San Francisco. And for New Zealand, that is what Auckland does. It is our big neural network agglomeration. And with reference to the migration thing, about a net 60% of the migrant flow, 60% of the net migrant flow goes to Auckland. Migrants go where migrants have gone. Migrants go where the jobs are. And I extrapolate that to the future, and it says to me, in an environment where there is a continuing and I'd suggest worsening shortage of builders because young people want to go into technology sector and not have a job where you risk smashing your thumb or getting electrocuted or sawing your arm off or this sort of thing. This was the feedback from the plumbers, this morning. They can't get staff. The shortage of housing which exists in Auckland, it will get worse. Whatever number you've had in your head 1 year ago, 5 years ago, it is bigger now. It will be bigger in 5 years' time. And that says to me the prices will continue to rise. And if you were to ask me now, the question people have been asking me since, I'll claim the middle of 09, I won't claim 08 or 09, since the middle of 09, anybody asking me, I hear these forecasts of there's a major depression, recession coming along, we're going to be hit by foot and mouth or an asteroid, or we're going to get nuked or something like that. Do you think I should buy a house now or should I wait? And my response every single time since mid-09 has been, I see no incentive to wait. I would look to buy now. And that remains my comment at the moment. Now, we were asked, us speakers, if possible, to contribute maybe something from personal experience in terms of thinking outside the box. My example is, I guess, what I did 2.5 years ago. I started spending a lot more time up in Auckland and decided I don't want to be living out of hotel rooms and maybe I don't have the budget for it anyway. Initially, I bought in Eden Crescent a 27 square metre bedsit. Being a bit of a tradesperson there, I got my saw, I bought tools. It was great to buy a whole new supply of tools. I cut the double bed in half, stuck it back together and made it into a single bed, demolished a wardrobe, made an internal wall. I had great fun. And after 4 months, I'd sort of done everything you can just about do of polite nature with other people around in a 27 square metre area. So I started looking for something more. And I kept coming across this particular property advertised, I think it was on the Trade Me website, and going, God, she is so beautiful, I'd love to buy it. It's female for your guide, is what I've gender notified it, sort of. And I said, I would love to buy her, but you can't be that crazy. And I kept going back to it and back to it. I thought, oh, what the hell? Let's go have a look. And I looked at it, and basically I was hooked. And I went along to a planner, and I said, I'm looking at this 180 square metre disused cocktail bar in Emily Place in Auckland. It's 6 minutes walk from Queen Street there. Do you reckon I can go to the council and get a resource consent to get this reclassified from commercial use, it was a failed bar, to residential? And this bloke looked at it and he said he only takes on jobs that he knows he's going to succeed at. And he said, yeah, I reckon we can get this reclassified. So I put my offer in, got it accepted. Nobody else was putting an offer in. It was too blooming crazy. And we went to the council 4 weeks later. Resource consent came through, and I converted basically then over the next 18 months, with no building consent required for work that I did there, this cocktail bar into a beautiful large apartment in there with, I got my spa in there, got my gym in there, got a bit of a home cinema thing going on, added a few extra bedrooms, and of course once it got reclassified, the value basically immediately doubled on the place. So that is my sort of thinking outside the box. I did something which other people just went, no, that's too crazy. I'd not do that. And I thought, well, I'm crazy. I mean, my first house I bought back in 1987, the FOMO that you have felt and you maybe feel at the moment, I felt that in spades in the middle of 1987. Prices were rising. Rumours of every economist at the Reserve Bank is buying houses. I had to buy anything. So I thought, I've got to find something that no one else is going to bid on. And so I found it. It's a half acre of basically blackberry bush with a house on it in a gully downstream of 2 reservoirs in Wellington. Why was it on the market and so cheap there at $82,000? Because the council had bought it about 6 or 7 years earlier. Why did they purchase it and a number of other properties of the 7 in this valley there? Because a report came out saying when the earthquake comes to Wellington, the upper concrete reservoir will burst, the water will flow onto the lower reservoir, made of dirt, it will burst, half the water will go through the Karori Tunnel, down Glenmore Street and take out civil defence, which at that time was underneath the parliamentary swimming pool as well. The other half will go down this valley and wipe out these houses. The recommendation in the report was build steps up the western slope of the valley. In the event of an earthquake, run up the steps. FOMO led me to buy this thing. It was absolutely fantastic. For 6 years, I'd show up proudly at work covered in blackberry scratches from, making a lawn, and I learnt some basic handyman skills, etc. on the whole place. I really didn't make any capital gain. Like I say, I bought 4 weeks before the share market crashed, so just keep that in mind. But I would do it again. I just absolutely loved it. And I said about the bar, it's sort of female. It's too pretty to be calling it a masculine bar at all. And if you're interested, Google Tony Alexander Listener, as in the Listener magazine. They did an article on me and my bar in the March issue of 2016. My time has got to be well up. Thanks very much for having us this evening. Cheers.
I was going to say, I wish that you threw something up on the AV. I would love to have a creep on your place. It sounds amazing. A cocktail bar. Oh, my God. Thank you so much, Tony. All right, next up we have Felicity Gray, who is the Director of the Property Practice. Felicity loves property, having a broad experience in buying and selling homes, investment properties, renovation and relocating second-hand dwellings, as well as completing new builds. She knows her stuff. Please welcome up Felicity Gray.
Thanks, Amber. Tony's a bit of a hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. Hi, everyone. This evening, I want to talk to you about a couple of key areas that I commonly see in my practice, which might be relevant to your circumstances or give you some ideas to think about. The first is buying together with friends and family. The second is the use of gifts of money or provision of guarantees from parents. And then I'm just going to wrap up talking about some of the legal implications from those sorts of property ownership structures. So the first trend is the increase in first-time home buyers pooling resources to buy property in groups with either family or friends. This is actually quite an interesting one, not only from the affordability perspective, but I guess also from the social perspective in terms of challenging our perceptions about what the norm is in terms of buying property in New Zealand. The most common examples I tend to see in my practice are an obvious one, de facto married couples buying together, and then not so commonly parents buying with children, brothers and sisters buying property together, and then slightly less common but also on the increase, friends buying with other friends. So what are the pros and cons of doing this? A bit of a minefield. The most obvious example for the positive is that you can more quickly and easily get your deposit together for a property, which, as we all know, is probably one of the most difficult things to achieve if you're paying rent in Auckland and trying to save for a deposit. Another plus is that obviously all the costs associated with property ownership, such as the setup costs, mortgage repayments, maintenance rates and so on goes on, are obviously shared. so the risk for each party is diluted. I guess there's also the chance that you're going to be able to buy in an area that you actually might want to live in. And I guess I also do see slightly less common situations where, for example, one person might have a really healthy deposit that they've saved up, but then another person has a better cash flow or ability to repay higher mortgage repayments. And so that's a combination that can work quite well to aid both parties to get onto the property ladder. And I guess it's not just a case of pooling financial resources. People do have obviously lots of different talents, and so if you've got a deposit, why not hook up with someone with mean building skills, for example? Maybe they should start a Tinder for house buying. In terms of the cons, probably everybody here who's ever flattered is probably thinking of the worst case scenario where you're not only stuck living with someone who's socially inept and doesn't clean up after themselves, but now suddenly you're financially tied up with them and you own a house together. I guess this probably goes to the point that you would probably want to put a lot of energy into deciding who to go with quite carefully from a practical perspective. And I guess, like Tony was saying, it might not even be a house that you live in that you invest in. It might be a rental property with tenants in it that you've bought together with somebody else. I guess it's also worth bearing in mind that if we get real about it, that it's probably not going to be your forever home, but it is simply a means to an end to enable you to get onto the property ladder, which is obviously the hardest step. Once you're on the property ladder, it just makes it so much easier to create more options for yourself in the future. The second trend that I want to talk about is people, it's also an example of people pooling resources together, but in a more specific context relating to parents and children. So I personally see it happening more and more now that getting either a loan or more commonly a gift from parents or using equity in their family home is getting really, really common, especially in Auckland. I mean, it obviously sucks if you don't have parents who've got a house or super loaded parents or generous parents, but like quite a few of the instances I see, they're just normal people who want to help their children out from a really practical perspective. And their children are really grateful for it as well. The most common example is a gift. That's where you have evidence of payment of money with no strings attached, so it's not a loan. That's generally a requirement of a lending bank. Some lawyers would encourage parents to take a small ownership share in the property, which just protects them a little bit more because it gives them some more control. But generally, I find that parents are perfectly happy to trust their kids 100%. A second common way I see parents helping children is through providing a guarantee in respect of the children's borrowings in favour of the bank. So this means, of course, that the bank has a second recourse in the event of default by the kids on their loan. So that may enable a first-time home buyer to actually get a loan approval when they wouldn't otherwise, or it might enable them to just get away with having a smaller deposit or avoid paying low equity premiums, which is obviously an amazing advantage. And it doesn't require a big chunk of cash to be provided, which is great. So how it works, if you're interested from a practical perspective, is that the children will either go with the bank that already has a mortgage to the parents' property so that the two mortgages are linked up, or sometimes parents even refinance away to a new bank that the children want to go with. It's obviously really important in this circumstance that if parents are providing a guarantee that it's limited to as small amount as possible. If it was unlimited in amount, then that means that there's no monetary limit on how much liability the parents are up for if the kids screw up and don't pay their mortgage. And obviously the pros for this are pretty apparent. The downsides are a bit more obvious for the poor parents, but then some have actually said to me that if it means that they get their 30-something-year-old child to finally move out of home and stop bludgeoning off them, then that's a very small price to pay. And the third aspect that I want to just briefly touch on is some of the legal documents that relate to joint purchasing or purchasing in groups. Now, because some of the purchasing structures and financial structures, I'm suggesting are obviously not your standard kind of thing. They're a little bit more complicated. It is obviously important that you get the legal structures right from the beginning so that everybody who is involved is on the same page, obviously, and that does prevent problems from cropping up down the road. There are two types of document that I want to touch on, which may be of interest to you. The first is what's commonly known as a property sharing agreement. This document is specifically designed to deal with all of the implications that come along with buying a property that's owned by more than one party, so it could be just two or it could be more. It's a very important document. The actual process of creating it obviously brings to light all the various issues that people should be discussing, and so hopefully it creates some discussion and then enables everyone to get onto the same page. The types of things that a property sharing agreement would cover are if people make different deposit contributions, then it's quite common that, for example, if I have two people who might have contributed slightly different deposit amounts, but they would like to pay the mortgage off equally, generally they'll own the property in separate half shares, but the property sharing agreement will state that if and when the property is sold, that the parties will get their respective deposits back and then split any capital gain after the balance of the mortgage is paid off. In other examples, if someone's got a really significantly bigger amount that they're putting in, you might not have equal shares. There's no particular circumstance or one size fits all. There's so many different circumstances, but generally we can accommodate all of them. From the point of view of groups of people borrowing from the bank, I think it is quite important to understand that in most instances, in terms of your liability to the bank as a group under the loan agreement, from the bank's perspective, each party will be responsible individually for the whole amount of the loan. But a property sharing agreement can regulate this as between the individual parties, so that, for example, if one party stuffs up and the others have to subsidise it and pay some of the mortgage for that person, the property sharing agreement will give a contractual right to enable the subsidising parties to get the money back from the defaulting party. Obviously, they set out maintenance and expenditure, all sorts of different things. It's very important they have a dispute resolution process in them so that if there is a disagreement, then there's a prescribed way to deal with this. I think most importantly, probably property sharing agreements set out a process of steps that have to be carried out in the event that one party wants to exit out of the partnership or one party dies, for example. A typical scenario here would be that if one party wanted to exit the arrangement, they will give notice, and then this would trigger an option from the remaining parties to buy out that person's share if they could, and that would be at a registered market value. And then if the remaining parties couldn't or didn't want to do that, then it either might trigger an option to the exiting party to buy the whole property, or the property would then be placed on the market for sale. So that's just a little example of a typical scenario. And the second type of legal document I want to mention is not a very romantic one, but it's contracting out agreements, commonly known in the olden days as prenups. Most of you probably already know that the presumptions in the Property Relationships Act, whereby assets are accumulated during a relationship, are split 50-50, and that applies whether you are married or in a de facto relationship. And even if you've been in a relationship for less than 3 years, that doesn't mean that the Act won't apply. And another common misperception is that if one party has all of their assets in a trust, then those assets will be protected, but that's not necessarily the case either. So the only way to get around this is to have a properly prepared contracting out agreement. Sometimes people come in and they've just done their own little thing and signed it, but you need to have lawyers involved, otherwise it doesn't contract you out of the provisions of the Act. In some ways, if you both start out with not much, then one bonus of that is that you probably don't need a contracting out agreement. But obviously for people who have different assets or it's a second time round type relationship, this is obviously quite a tricky area to navigate, and obviously you don't want to ostracise your partner by broaching a contracting out agreement such that you don't actually have a relationship to have a contracting out agreement with. Yeah, so if you're interested, I won't go into the details of contracting out agreements, it's boring. I did want to just mention that how property sharing agreements and contracting out agreements interlink is that if a couple, a de facto married couple, have a property together and they're also having a contracting out agreement, then more often than not, all of the things that have been taken into account for a PSA, all of those considerations would be incorporated into a contracting out agreement. So that's how they sort of interlink. But at the same time, it is really important to understand that if you're in a de facto relationship or married, then if you've got a property sharing agreement, that doesn't mean that that will override the provisions of the Property Relationships Act. So even if it says, if we break up, A gets this amount and B gets this amount, that could all go down the drain if one party makes a claim under the PRA. And just one other point I'd like to make in respect of the relevance of contracting out agreements for group buying situations, and when you've got parents gifting money especially. A lot of parents gift money, as I said, to their son and daughter, who then might turn around and buy a house with their partner. And that money will also be subject to the 50-50 split assumptions in the PRA. And so having a legally binding contracting out agreement is the only way to protect that money in the event of a split. And that is something that has caused a lot of families, when a partnership breaks up, quite a lot of angst. So in conclusion, obviously the ideas that I've talked about is just the very basic framework. Every situation is different, but we can tailor particular solutions depending on people's circumstances. And I guess we don't need to pretend that drafting up legal paperwork is the most exciting part of buying a property. I'm sure that lots of my clients would much rather spend it on a couch than some legal documents, but it is really, really important that you get a lawyer and other professionals involved early on in the process, especially if you're seriously considering this kind of joint ownership structure as an option. We all genuinely want to make the process as painless as possible, and not all lawyers are fuddy-duddy, bald old men. I will be sticking around at the end, so please do come up and chat with me if you'd like, or even give me a call if you don't get a chance to speak with me tonight, to have a preliminary chat, and I promise I won't send you a bill. Thank you.
Oh, Felicity, you don't know what you've just done. Next up, we have Logan Harvey. Logan's role is to facilitate presentations and education forums on how to check your financial health, and the big one, how you can be good with money. Take it away, Logan.
Well, it's the first time I've actually seen that photo, and I think it's a bit too close. I'll just need to put this up. Cool, thank you. As Amber said, I'm the financial health man. Much like a doctor, I just don't deal with blood. That was funny, thanks. So this is something new that the BNZ's doing, and one that we're already seeing as being quite beneficial for anyone who participates, which is great. And also, a financial health check could be your ticket on getting onto that property ladder, so that's why I've been invited along tonight. Cool. So a financial health check is a recommendation-based conversation where we get to know you and understand the full scope of your aspirations and financial goals. This then allows us the ability to give recommendations based on the relevant information and helping you achieve these. Now, these recommendations are impartial, so that means that we're not going to sell to you, we're not going to expect you to come on board, and we're not going to tell you, I mean, we'll educate you in terms of telling you what to do, but we won't be like your mother. And this just really helps us to be able to make sure that you do achieve these. Now, you do have the opportunity to talk to us further if we are able to help you, but that's completely up to you. Now, what you see on the board, there we go, this wee little jazzy document is what we actually use in the financial health check, and it's been designed to capture all the relevant information. Now, what we start by is understanding who you are and what your current situation looks like. Everything from family, place of work, interests and hobbies. And then we have a look at what's on your agenda and what you're trying to achieve now. This can be something from repaying debt. Now, I overspent at Christmas and I've still got my credit card to pay down, so that could be you. It could be that you're starting a family, or much of you in this room, you're trying to get onto that property later. Now, next we have a look at what your future looks like and the goals and the goals that you're aspiring to achieve. Now, why we look at the future as well is that that recommendation is solely based on what you're trying to achieve in the future, just so we don't intentionally trip you up while you're on your way. Now, some of these goals are either reducing student loans, so sometimes student loans are hanging around for some of us, either starting a business and retirement. Retirement's on everyone's agenda. It's going to happen. Now, once we've ascertained where you'd like to be, we then dive into your budget on the next slide. And this is the real value add and the game changer in making sure that you can actually achieve these goals and or get on that property ladder. So that's the main difference there, because your expenses are what trip you up. Now from there, we'll build a plan together, considering all the information that you have provided to us, to make sure that you're on the right path in achieving these goals that are most important to you. Cool. Well, I was told that I only had a couple of minutes to talk, and that's pretty much me. But the idea behind this is it's simple and easy, and we're here to help, and we want to make sure that we don't make it too complicated, because finances can be very complicated. So I'll be floating around if anyone has any questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, okay, pull that back down here. Thank you, Logan. And next up we have Simon Crang. Now, Simon has over 19 years' experience as the BNZ mobile mortgage manager and a total of 41 years in the finance industry. Simon regularly helps customers fulfill their financial dreams of buying or building a home, purchasing an investment property, or getting that beach house they always dreamed of. Please put your hands together for Simon.
Measuring before I start. So this is roughly 4 square metres. If you add another metre on, that's what Tony used to live in. And that actually relates to another story I'll be telling. My talk tonight is very much about the apartment market. Reason being, it's probably the most affordable for most Kiwis, and we're talking about here about getting into your first home. Just out of your reference, a point of reference is that a lot of people think you need a 20% deposit to buy your first home. Totally incorrect. Our doors are open for people with a 5% deposit to buy an existing home or an apartment at 10%. Now, there are some parameters around size of the apartment, and I suppose that's where I was talking about this 27 square metres. True story. I was out playing golf, which some of my colleagues know I'm not that great at, down at Amokaroa. And I had a phone call, thankfully it took me off my worst shot I was playing. And this customer rang up, or lady rang up, and she said to me, I want to buy a 27 square metre apartment. I don't even think my cat would be happy to live in a 27 metre square apartment. I suppose the question I always say to people is, how long could you live in a 27 square metre apartment before you go stir crazy? And that's probably, as I said to this lady here, she's struggling to find finance. But the apartment market is certainly, we've seen huge growth in that area. What has allowed people to buy property in general is the KiwiSaver. If you think what happened before KiwiSaver, we had to save money, we had to put money away in our bank account, then suddenly there'd be this lovely trip going to Fiji, and I think, oh, I might go and use some of my savings and go on a nice holiday. KiwiSaver has opened up the door to so many Kiwis now that before KiwiSaver came along, could not buy a property. Now with the forced saving that you already have in terms that your employer is almost doubling your money, the government's giving you a kickstart of $1,000, they give you a tax rebate of $520 odd a year, plus any earnings you get of that money, you cannot touch it. You cannot touch it for that holiday. And it is a great way of saving money, and the return on it
if you take into account what the employer is giving, is a very, very good return. After 3 years, you can draw that money out. It can be used for two things, buying a home or for your retirement. And for most of us here, it is to, not for myself, but it's for most people to buy your first home. Secondly, with the KiwiSaver, you may also qualify for the government's Home Loan Start Grant. Now that's, depending on how many years you've been in KiwiSaver, you can get an additional $10,000 per individual. So for a couple, there's an extra $20,000 that you could get for the government as a kickstart for your home loan, or for buying your home. One thing we do say is that you really need to have some savings yourself though, so we don't purely rely on that KiwiSaver, the Home Start Grant. You need to have at least 5% of your own hard-earned money. So what I want to talk about is just the process about what we look at when you come to the bank about buying a home, and just go through what we'd be looking to look at, how we do our calculations, and talk about interest rates and perhaps loan structures. Going back to the apartments, if we look at central Auckland, going back to the many years, as I said, 19 years in the finance industry, apartments were very much central Auckland based. Cranes were going up everywhere. We saw the apartments really in that central area around Nelson Street, around Anzac Ave, apartments down in the Viaduct, which are quite expensive. We are now seeing apartments, of course, popping up all around the suburbs. North Shore, West Auckland, South Auckland, East Auckland. Myself, I live in East Auckland. Stonefield's prime example. As the land is becoming scarce within Auckland, and most of us desire to live where we grew up, where our family are, where our children might be, apartment is an ideal way of still living close to where you work, and also due to, as Tony mentioned, the double income now is required for most people to service a loan. So we're seeing mum and dad, or husband and wife, de facto relationships, both working. You don't want to come home to cutting the lawns, cutting the hedge, painting the house. People are so busy these days, and that's where the apartment market is ideal. You do have some costs related to an apartment, the body corporate, but overall it is generally a very good investment for an investor because of the rental return, or for the homeowner occupier. Little things you've got to worry about, you don't know who your neighbours are. You're in a high-rise apartment, and those sort of things can be of a concern. Also, location is very important, and I think everybody talks about location, 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 buy the worst house in the best street. We can't always afford that worst house in the best street now, but it's something to think about. Is that my time? A survey of first home buyers showed that 40% of first home buyers were now looking at buying outside of Auckland as an investment. And I suppose it's the affordability around being able to generate rent from that property. Outside of Auckland, cheaper areas, Hamilton, which has increased, Tauranga is gone, Huntly, Tokoroa, Tikawata, there's a lot of property out there where you do not need to necessarily buy within Auckland. And as we've all been saying, all of us have mentioned the property ladder, getting onto the property ladder. So I don't know if you were part of the 40%, but buying a property, renting it out to help pay the mortgage while you're living at home with mum and dad, as I have got one of my sons returned from London. So living with mum and dad is the cheapest, or you go boarding. But that is a way of getting to the property market because of what's happened within the Auckland area, which has just become very expensive. Things to look out for, just some points to look out for. As I said, the 27 square metres, how long could you live in that for? Location, extremely important. The other thing is also just allow for the fact that you are going to have some additional costs of owning an apartment, which is the body corporate costs, but also when you own a home, you've got rates. So the body corporate sort of balances out a wee bit. The location area is extremely important. And as we see the Auckland spread, Auckland CBD, it's not for everybody. And please make sure that if you do buy a property, that you are able to stay in that property for an extended period of time. Our life, our life changes in terms of children come along. And certainly an apartment may not be desirable once you are having children. What you can actually do then is either leverage off the equity of that property, keep it as an investment. They're a fantastic rental return for a reasonably low price. leverage off that property, the equity in it, then to move on to your second property, buying a home, which I think is most people's desire, is to have the home with a white picket fence, the trees, the cutting the lawns, doing the paintwork, cutting the hedge, all those things that we don't really want to do. But certainly that is what we as Kiwis like to do. So just going through the process of if you came to see me about borrowing money, what would I ask for? The main thing is understanding your financial situation, and everybody's financial situation is different. We all have different expenses. A lot of those expenses we don't need to continue. The gym, for example, I don't think I ever went to the gym. You have other things such as superannuation, where you're paying into your KiwiSaver. That can be stopped once you've got yourself into a mortgage, because you may want to put that money towards paying your mortgage off. The return on that interest saving could be better on the return of what you're getting on your superannuation funds or your KiwiSaver. What we look at is saying, well, let's look at your expenses, and we run through your expenses from day-to-day living costs. As I said, the gym, the food, the petrol, the main living costs, power, water, gas. We will also sit there and add on an expense for what we consider will be the rates and the insurances to own a home. We also will ask you for your pay slips. Now, even though your bank account, be it with the BNZ or whichever bank you may be with, what goes into your bank account is probably less than what you actually are earning, because you're paying KiwiSaver, you might be paying off and taking some payments of direct debits of insurances coming out of your pay before we set into your bank account. For that reason, we actually say, look, give us your last couple of pay slips. We can look at what your pay is. We net that pay up, we take off those expenses, and we come up with this magical figure that we are able then to convert into, based on this surplus, this is how much you can borrow. With your deposit, there's your purchase price. Very, very simple. I actually did a loan for one of my colleagues just recently, and we have got a calculator. Sorry, was that me? We have got this calculator which 5-10 minutes, if you sat down and told me what your income is, what your expenses are, I can give you within 5 minutes an answer on how much you can borrow. Very, very simple. From there, we actually would need to get a pre-approval. It's extremely important that you do get a pre-approval before you actually look at finding a home. A lot of us like to jump on TradeMe, look at that dream home, and you sit back and find it, or wander through the Barfoot and Thompson windows and sit back and find a house that you love. What I don't want you to do is to fall in love with that home and then to find you can't afford it. So we will talk about what can you afford, or, as we've discussed tonight, adding incomes of family, colleagues, brothers, sisters, joining together. That may give you the ability to buy that dream home. So what we do, as I say, is that we will discuss what you can afford, we'll fill out a loan application form, and then we will give you what's called a pre-approval. The pre-approvals last from 60 days if your deposit's less than 20%, up to 90 days for a deposit more than 20%. Most people probably don't find a home within 60 and 90 days. In fact, I've got people that I'm looking after that's been on my books for about 9 months, and they just won't buy. And I think why they're not buying is that they're thinking too much with their head, and it's the people with the hearts that are buying the property. They go in there, they do all the stats, they find out what the house is worth, they do research, and they set a price figure. But then there's so many people out there that fall in love with a house on TradeMe, fall in love with a house through walking past the window, and they're willing to keep going. And that's what we've seen with the market, and that's probably why it's gone a little bit crazy out there. And I don't know if those customers of mine will buy for some time, because they're still too much thinking with their head. Where do I go to? Pre-approvals. So if your pre-approval expires after 60 days, 90 days, it's very easy to renew it. All we ask for is some updated information, give us some pay slips, give us some bank statements again, if you don't bank with the BNZ, and we'll just renew that for another 60 and 90 days, and we just keep rolling it over. One thing I would strongly suggest you do when you find that property is contact, for example, the BNZ. We've got a free service where we can do what's called an online valuation of that property. There's various apps out there and sites you may have seen through Facebook where you can jump on and say, what is your property worth? What we will do is actually plug that address into the property. It will spit out a price range, the highest price range of what is happening in your area for that sort of house versus the lowest price range. It will then give us a guesstimate. This is what your house is worth. We think it's going to be worth 700,000. Now, I'm not too sure what the science is behind it, but it's sort of accurate, but don't rely on it. It will also come up with what we call risk flags. And risk flags are if we understand or if we are aware that that property may have had weather tightness issues. No guarantee with what we see to say that the house is weather tight. Hence, you need to do your homework, probably by going and getting a builder's report. Most cases, the bank doesn't want one. It's for your own peace of mind to make sure that when you buy this house, the side of the house doesn't fall over. All right? So get a builder's report. Also, in most cases, we don't need a valuation. We'll just work off the sales and purchase agreement, make sure you haven't paid too much to this report that we've done. And we'll say, look, we'll accept that as being the value. But if you're borrowing if you have got a less than 20% deposit, we'll probably want a valuation just to check on that property, just to make sure it's worth what you paid. So that makes it very, very hard for people with less than 20% deposit to be able to buy at auction. One thing we don't want you doing is running around getting registered valuations on every house you see. $750, $1,000 a pop. Becomes too expensive. So for 20% deposit buyers, it's pretty easy to sit there and go to an auction because we have given you almost a guarantee that we will back you on that purchase. But with a less than 20% deposit, we're saying, look, we need a valuation just to check you haven't paid too much for it. So really you are looking more at negotiating, which is a house that's got a price on it, or the price by negotiation. Great thing about those is you're not up against 20 other people bidding. It's just you and the vendor. So depending on what your deposit level is, it will depend on whether the bank needs a valuation or not. But please use the bank's services of an online valuation. It just gives you a guesstimate of what we believe the house is worth and maybe any risks around weather tightness. Then once you've been successful with that purchase, I suppose what happens next? Well, your lawyer will want to get a letter from the BNZ saying that your loan's now unconditional. Fantastic. We will then sit with you and discuss loan structuring. And this is probably one of the most important things out there. And what I'll say is, do not always go for the cheapest interest rate. The cheapest interest rates are normally our short-term fixed rates, 6 months, 12 months, 1 year, 2 years. I would sit down and say to you, what is your risk appetite? And what I mean by that is, if interest rates went up by 1%, 1.5%, 2%, what effect does that have on you in terms of your servicing ability? Prime example is my son bought a house 3 years ago. He was up to his maximum in terms of what he could afford to borrow. If interest rates had gone up by 2%, he'd be looking for a second job, posting mail or cutting lawns or something or other. So I said to him, well, yes, we have got cheaper interest rates at 1 or 2 years, but spread your risk. And what I mean by that is we can have fixed interest rates up to 7 years. Yes, they're more expensive than rates for 2 years. But if you put some of your loan on 1, 2, 3, 5, 7 years, it means that your total borrowing is not coming up all at once when that rate may have increased. So by spreading the risk, it means that you only got a small portion of your loan coming up for maturity. In saying that, most people look at 2 years, but it may not be the best option for you. So just remember that in terms of what is your affordability. We always also suggest that you put a small amount on floating interest rate. And we have a product called Total Money, which is where your income, all your savings, that money that you are putting away perhaps for a holiday, we can use that to offset against your mortgage to save you interest. So that money is actually saving interest on your loan. A great product, something to look at, and we would definitely discuss that if you wanted to talk about housing finance. So a small portion. We're not talking about a big amount, 15,000, 20,000. Once we've done that loan structure, we then send our documentation to the lawyer. You go and sign the documents. We wait for settlement. The house is yours. You move in. We'll try and send you flowers. Can't guarantee that. Or a box of chocolates or some muffins. But certainly it's something that, getting into that first home, walking across that doorstep, your partner picks you up, carries you over. Fantastic. Last thing, insurance. If I ask, what is your major asset? that you're going to insure. Can I ask, perhaps, what is your major asset if you own a home? House is your major asset. Your car is your major asset. So is your contents and all that jewellery that your partner buys you, major asset. The question that I say to my customers is, what allows you to have that major asset? Now, that major asset is your income. Without your income, you won't have the house, you won't be able to pay your bills, you won't have the car, and your partner will not continue to buy you jewellery. Hence, we talk about life income protection insurance. It's for that unforeseen circumstance, and that's something which is not if you're single, or if you're married, or if you've got children, for all different stages of your life. It's something that we do talk about. A colleague of mine some years ago, he said to me, Simon, if you were living in your house, you weren't working, your sole source of income was the ATM in the backyard. So you went down to the ATM, you got money out to pay your bills, to pay your food. Would you insure that ATM against theft, damage, rains that we had, flooding, and it doesn't work? Absolutely. He said to me, you are that ATM. So I think that's a great way to put it. Finally, look, I'd just like to say thank you very much. Logan and I are down the back. Please have a chat to us if you wish. Thank you.
Gosh, so insightful. I hope you guys are all learning. That's fantastic. Yes, great. Next up, we have Craig McNair. Craig became an auctioneer after 6 years I've been a successful salesperson with Barfoot and Thompson. Craig is one of the most sought-after auctioneers at Barfoot. Craig also picked up a number of auctioneer awards before he became the B&T Auctioneer Champion of 2012 and 2013. Welcome up, Craig.
Thank you, Amber. It's very good being here. Thank you for having me. I love being an auctioneer, and there's lots of reasons for this, but I love the company that I work for and the region that I look after, which starts out in the west from Te Atatu, Glendine, and moves upwards towards the northern part of our city and finishes up in Whangaparoa, Orewa and Millwater. So that's the area and the region that I look after. The first topic I want to discuss today is having a strategy buying at auction. When I think of strategy, the great tennis player Novak Djokovic comes to my mind. He trains, he sets goals, plans, he strategises his moves before his tennis match. And I believe you can draw some comparisons buying a property at auction, believe it or not. So the key thing is to note that Novak wins a lot of his games, but he also loses some of them as well. So firstly, don't be discouraged if you miss out on buying a property for a few times before you actually win it, or even a lot of times. Stay positive as much as you can and try as hard as you can for as long as you can. So as auctioneer, I work with hard-working Barfoot and Thompson agents that normally conduct 3 to 4 week marketing campaigns, and they work with buyers, helping them to get builders through so they can conduct builders reports, and they help buyers with knowledge on what's been selling in the area and so on and what's on the market. The agents also meet with our owners, giving feedback from buyers and discussing their expectations and dreams about the future and what they want to achieve. So nearer the end of the process, I get involved as the auctioneer and I help set the reserve price. And then right at the end, just before the big event comes, and that is auction day. So I jump up and I stand on a podium similar to this, and I'll ask for an opening bid. Who's going to start me away now with an opening bid, opening offer? Call it away. What about 500 to start me off? Well done with you at 500 now, closer to the front door than anyone else at 500 with you, through the middle, through the channel now, looking for another 10. And at that point, this is where strategy becomes so important. Now you might ask, it's pretty simple, isn't it? It's not that complicated. Well, I call about 20 to 40 auctions most weeks and see people leave with regret every week. And I see them, and often sometimes I get to talk to them as they walk out the door, and they wish that they had just bid once or twice more, and they regret missing out by $1,000 or $500 when they did have a little bit more gas in the tank. So in my opinion, I believe strategy is very important to increase your chances at auction. So when an auctioneer asks for an opening bid, when he asked for that opening $500,000 to start us off, well, throw your hand up, give it your best shot, and stay in as large bidding increments as you can for as long as you can. Obviously, know your limit. You'll have to know that. You don't want to get too carried away. That's why the good people at BNZ are here to help you. But I think a mistake we can make is to ask the auctioneer for lower increments, especially early on. Or if the auctioneer asks for that $500,000 to start us away, and then you say, hey, $300,000, and you try to cut the auctioneer down right at those early stages, knowing that the opening bid is always going to be quite a bit below the reserve price. So that, I believe, makes for a less successful strategy. Because one thing a lot of people do forget, I find, is that they forget that the owners are actually in the auction room. They're actually there, looking, watching what the bidders are doing. And by bidding in good faith, you can make such a difference. You not only build rapport with the auctioneer, and I'll talk about this briefly shortly, but you also are showing the owners that you respect their property and in turn respect them. I remember a great story a little while ago where one of our agents was showing some buyers around properties so they could buy, and they made an appointment with some owners to show these people through. And so the agent met on the side of the street with this young couple that were trying to get into their first property, and they went down the driveway, they knocked on the door. The owners, it must have been an evening or something like that, the owners opened the door and welcomed them in. They briefly shook hands and said, thank you very much for letting us come through. And so the owners went off into the lounge or whatever, and then the buyers and the agent went through the house, looked at the 3 bedrooms and small little deck and enjoyed that, and then came back through and thanked the owners, and they walked out. A week later, they arrived at the auction room to bid on this specific property. And I was at the podium, like I am right now. I was at the podium and I asked for an opening bid. And I forget the exact numbers, so I'm just going to use the 500 that I've been using since I started. So I asked for an opening bid. Who's going to start me away at 500,000 now? I call it away, bid it away, offer it away at 500, and straight away their hands go up. At $500,000 and looking for another 10, go the boat and Barrett, need another 10, so 510 bid. And they came straight back at 520, and then the other bids kicked in at 530 again. And then the bidding stopped at 540 with these buyers that I was talking about. And at that point, we approached them and we just obviously said to them that the bidding is still below the reserve price, because it was at that point. And then we went back and forward between them and our owners, trying to get the property on the market. And the buyers, they increased their bid a little bit as well, because they knew the value of that area and they knew the market quite well. They'd been looking for a while, and so they were happy to increase. And then we went to the owners and we said, hey, look, we'll go back for that extra $5,000 to get that figure that you wanted, and we'll try to get it on the market. And I'll never forget this. These owners looked at us and they said, we don't want you to go back and get that extra $5,000. And we went, but we're always trained to go and get that extra $5,000, because obviously we're working for the vendor. And they said, no, we don't want you to do that, because we actually like them. We like them. And we met them briefly when they came through the open home last week, and they seemed nice. But today, we just see that they've been trying so hard. They bid straight away, and then when you asked for $10,000 again, they bid again, and then they've obviously increased a little bit as well. And we just want to say that we feel really respected, and we really feel like they've respected our property and like our property. And so we just want you to put it on the market right now. So we got them to adjust the reserve, and then I called it away at whatever figure, at 570 now, at 570, not a whisper, murmur, not a syllable or a sound, and I sold it to them. And there were hugs, and there were tears, and it was a great example of human kindness. But what it also showed me is that people buy people. And what I mean by that is is that when there is goodwill between both buyer and seller, things can come together a lot more smoothly. So at Barfoot & Thompson, we do not practice what is commonly called the vendor bid. So if bidding stops below our vendor's instructions to sell, more often than not, we will approach the highest bidder, engage in some dialogue between them and our owners, all in the endeavour to get the property on the market. So this creates total transparency for you as the buyer. So we will discuss increasing your bid when that happens, and I find that 99.9999% of buyers are very knowledgeable within a certain area. So very knowledgeable in close proximity of the property that they're buying. Now, real estate agents might have much wider general knowledge, but a lot about that specific area. And you've been going through open homes and talking with agents on what's sold and what hasn't and what's on the market. So 2 responses from buyers when we do approach them in the auction room when the bidding does stop below the reserve is first to get an increase, which is great, and if we can do that, similar to that scenario that I just talked to you about in that story of that young couple buying. You obviously, to do that, you're trying to get it on the market before it gets passed in and we open it up to other possible conditional interest. The other responses I get is a folding of the arms, and they say, no, that's it, definitely not. That's the market, is what some people say to me. That's the market, there's nobody else here for it, and so we're not increasing our bid. So when we tell the owner that, they obviously say no, and it becomes harder to create goodwill. Remember, people by people, when there's goodwill between both buyer and seller, things can come together more smoothly. So one last tip on bidding is not to bid late. So that's what I'm talking about, building rapport with the auctioneer. Build that rapport, bid early, bid strong. If you leave it until it's on the market and I don't see you and I call it away 3 times and it's going, sold, and then your goes up, then there is nothing I can do about it. We obviously can't reopen the bidding. So when you walk into the auction room next time or walk into an on-site auction, I want you all to say to yourself, I am the Novak Djokovic of the auction space. Now, don't say that loudly or out loud because people think you're really weird. But just remember what I mean by that. Strategize, plan. Sometimes you might miss out, but keep your chin up and stay positive. Changing tact, at the beginning I mentioned the region that I look after. There are 5 of us Barfoot & Thompson auctioneers that look after North, South, East, West and Central Auckland. And from what I've noticed in my area and talking to my colleagues, affordability can be obtained in some pockets and area throughout Auckland, such as Gulf Harbour is just one example, an area that I look after, obviously, where you're about 50-minute ferry ride to and fro from the city, where one of my colleagues that works at our Shortland Street head office showed me pictures or video of dolphins swimming alongside the ferry as they were coming into Gulf Harbour one evening. So soon you could be saying to yourself, with a glass of wine on a Friday night travelling back home, that easy travelling is most certainly mine. That's what you could be saying to yourself possibly. But that's just one example, obviously. So just what we're saying is to start in the property market sometimes requires an adjustment of suburb to create great opportunities for you. Look, thank you very much for letting me speak tonight. I know it's been a little bit outside the box and not quite the same as the other speakers. I hope it's been of assistance to you. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the auction room.
Thank you so much, Craig. Now, I don't know whether I can talk about my experiences, but as far as strategy goes, once my husband just got up to leave, that's really good timing. I once fell in love with a house, and we were on the lookout. Oh, there he is watching. Hello. And he was down at a work event in Queenstown, and fell in love with this house. Went through it. He'd never seen it before except for online. And it was D-Day, and I didn't think that we could afford it, so I actually put in as the opening bid my highest, and it bloody worked. It came in under reserve. It shut down the auction, And then I left, because I'm a bad person, so I left to try to scare them into thinking their only bidder had just left, and then we negotiated after I'd left. But yeah, just having a strategy that, there you go. Okay, let's get back to the experts. Okay, our last speaker, we have Nadia Saiki. Nadia is New Zealand's house doctor and a talented designer. Her approach to interior design is strategic, ensuring each unique statement delivers a return on investment and has timeless appeal. Please put your hands together for Nadia.
Thank you, Amber. Sounded very professional. Not sure if I put myself quite in that category that you put me in, but that's great. Good evening, everybody. So thank you for inviting me along to talk tonight, specifically about adding value to your property. So I'm assuming that you've already got to that stage where you found a property that you like. But look, I'm a qualified designer, a serial renovator, and a practicing house doctor. And when I first got to New Zealand and picked up my practice as a house doctor, it kind of caused a bit of confusion. And I used to get questions like, do you treat patients at your home, or do you go to their home and treat them? And I was like, oh God. I'd no sooner prescribe a medical remedy for my mother than I would get my husband to build an extension on our house. So that's certainly not what I do. So before I talk about adding value to your property, I might just sort of educate you a little bit about what a house doctor is. So you can get an understanding of kind of where I'm coming from and how it can benefit you when you're buying a property specifically to add value to and sell on. So strangely, house doctoring does have some synergies to the general medical profession in the way that we operate. I think Tony might disagree here, but I think your health is actually your biggest asset. If you don't have your health, you can't work and you can't create an income. So, but next to that is then your property. That's your next biggest asset. We all go to the GP. We all look after our bodies. We may go to the gym. We may have a bad diet. We may have a good diet. But needless to say, we take care of our health in a way that is similar to what we should take care of with our house, if that makes sense. So if you're investing in your health, you should invest in your house too and make sure that it is there for the long term and it will hold you right and get you where you need to go. So when you invite a house doctor into your home, it's kind of like having a medical examination with your GP, except we're not examining you or examining your house and the way you live. And we'll spend a little bit of time kind of getting to know you and understand what it is that you want to achieve, what your objectives are. You're going to sell it on, you're going to live there. Who's going to live there? How are you going to use it? What's your lifestyle like? And we get an understanding then of how the property needs to perform. If you're selling it, it's a slightly different strategy, and we need to understand who the target market is. But either way you look at it, it's kind of, it is a strategy, and you have to work backwards. You have to have a goal, you have to have an objective, and you work out a plan to meet those objectives within budget and within the right time frame. So house doctors are very similar to interior designers. I am a qualified interior designer. I studied in the UK for 7 years total. I understand that degrees are 3 years here. But then I kind of got very interested in return on investment, and that was my key focus. It's like, I can create beautiful statements, interior designers can create beautiful statements, but what I wanted was something more quantifiable. House doctoring is actually quite well known in Europe and in the States as well, but not so much here. And when I got here, I was kind of surprised that people weren't looking at their properties as an investment and really enhancing the positives and taking away the negatives to create value. I guess you guys didn't really need to at some stage because property was just booming, right? So now it's getting to the stage where it's really hard for you guys to get into the market, and you've got to be creative. You've got to think outside the box. You've got to work out a way where you can get your foot on the ladder of property investment. And so you have to be even more careful about what you're buying and how you're developing it to be able to get you to that next step to where you want to be. So adding value. Assuming you've got all your ducks in a row and you've spoken to the right professionals, you've been to see a financial health advisor, hello, you've listened to the economists in the world, and you've really taken on board everything that you need to know. It's important you go see a lawyer, a financier, you talk to your real estate agents, you gather all your data and you work out what it is that you can afford to buy and where you can afford to buy it. You make sure you have a pre-approval, and you make sure that you have your creative investment protected. So whether that is buying with your mum, your dad, your family, your friends, whatever your situation might be, cross your T's, dot your I's. Then, only then, can you start looking in the area that you want to buy in. And look, you might have to compromise. You can't buy a house in Auckland at the moment, or even anywhere outside of Auckland within decent commuting distance for less than $1 million, right? Maybe it's cozy, or what was the word you used? Potential, or one of a kind. But how I look at it is that you kind of like buy in that green band, and that's how I started in London, actually. I used to work on Tottenham Court Road, and I kind of wanted to be quite central, but no one could afford it. So I started looking at the areas around the South Circular, and still couldn't afford Clapham or anywhere like that. But digging deeper, I looked into the infrastructure of the area and where tube lines were going out to, where train lines were going out to, where councils were going to put money into hubs of infrastructures and local amenities. And I ended up buying this. This is my first project. Ended up buying this first floor apartment in a Georgian building in Forest Hill. Real dive at the time. But within 2 years, it paid off, because it used to take me an hour and a half to get from Forest Hill to Tottenham Court Road. But when the tube line got out there, it took me half an hour. And all of a sudden, the whole area went boom. And I sold that property probably only about 5 years later for about 4 times as much as I bought it for. So that was just pure luck. But you can still do something similar here. So perhaps buying outside of the area you want to be in, but start working in towards that area by adding value. So be smart. Have your strategy, like a marketing strategy, like a business strategy. Have your end goal, where you want to be in 10 to 20 years' time. Work backwards. And then start doing the research in the area that you can afford, that your budget allows you. But don't max out your mortgage. You've always got to keep a little bit in your back pocket to bribe him. You never know where you're going to need it. And you can pay off your mortgage quicker if you don't need it. Just pay off the extra. So, adding value to your home, this is what you really want to know, isn't it? That's why I'm here. I think the key for your first home, guys, is not to take on too much of a bigger project, okay? It could absolutely devour you if you are not skilled in the industry, or haven't got connections, or you naturally don't have time. You may be a busy parent and you work full-time. You've got to be there 24/7 if you're going to project manage your own full-blown renovation. So the best kind of property to buy is that one that has what we call good bones, a good, healthy home that has the right number of spaces, ticks all the right boxes, is in a good area, you've checked the location, you've been there a number of times, there's no nuisance neighbours, there's no barking dogs, there isn't, schools are pretty good, public transport's pretty good. Those have all ticked your boxes. The quality of your house needs to give you what you need, but allow you room to put your own kind of, stamp on your property. Without spending too much. So, to look for a healthy home, start by doing the check yourself. Look for things like termites and pests, any evidence of that. If you can get underneath the floor, check the floorboards. Those are the biggest things that can cost quite a lot to replace if you need to. Check the wiring, check the water pressure, go around, turn on all the taps. Don't use the toilet, but turn on all the taps and check the drainage as well. Plumbing's key. Check for damp patches, check for anywhere that maybe someone has actually painted over damp. That happens quite a lot, you know, the quick old Band-Aid over a gaping wound sort of thing. So just run your hand along the walls, go into the bathroom, look for mold, check for those sorts of things, because those are the ones that will eat your budget up, and you basically want none of that there. And don't forget the outside as well. God, so many people go in there and they're so excited about buying the first home that they're already moving in the furniture, they're already painting the walls, and they've forgotten to actually go and check outside and look up. Look at the roof, check the gutters, check the downpipes, look at all the sort of light fittings and switches as well. Also trees, they're a big killer as well. So it's lovely to have a garden full of trees, but just check. If they're old or looking like they're falling down, those can be really expensive to remove, so just be careful about that. So once you have actually had a good check through yourself and you know that it's the house that you want to buy, this is a step I always say, guys, please don't skip. And I know we've touched on it before, but a full building report is really important. I mean, it's expensive. So I know when you're on tight budget, you just think, well, can I cut costs? So, okay, my mate's a builder, I'll bring him round, and if he says it's okay, I'll buy it. You can take that risk, but if it ends up badly, you could not have any money back in your back pocket to do what you want to do. So do get a building report. And if anything crops up in that building report, you can use it as a negotiation tool. Is that right? You can? You can kind of go, well, this needs replacing, if it's a for sale and not an auction, obviously, because you have to take that. But yeah, it is really important to keep. And then you kind of know what you're up for when you are planning your renovation, what you've got to spend your money on. So the key is to plan really well what you need to do. So if you are renovating to sell your property on, so if it's part of your big plan and you're wanting to keep it for 2 to 5 years, maybe you're going to rent it out, maybe you're going to live there, but it's the step to the next project, then this is really important to go and have a chat to your real estate guys and understand who your potential target market would be in that area. And also look at other properties in that street or the area that have sold that have a similar spec, so similar number of rooms, similar size, that sort of thing, and what they're selling for when they've been done up. The difference between your purchase price and the average in that street is kind of what you can spend on your renovation. It used to be that you could spend 10% of the value of your property, and you should expect to get double your spend back in your profit. But I think nowadays there's no hard and fast rule. So it's always just a good idea just to talk to the professionals to get an idea of what your safety net will be, and then put that budget aside. Then start looking at what you need to, what you can improve on. Now, I've written lots of articles before on improving the value of your home, and there's lots of media saying, the kitchens and bathrooms add the biggest amount of value. And they do. I mean, kitchens can add up to 15% of the value of a property if done well, and 10% for bathrooms. But if you guys are tight with your money, you don't need to go a full-blown sort of makeover. Start from the outside in. And the reason why I do this is because a buyer will make up their mind on a property within the first 5 to 8 seconds of pulling up to your house. So curb appeal is actually the biggest draw card. So walk through, tidy up your front entrance. Make sure you've got a strong visual lead up to a strong front door. And replace that tired old letterbox and things like that. Start there. Then quick fixes that will add a huge impact to the value of a property that won't actually break the bank and you won't need consent for is things like changing your hardware and upgrading your taps, your lighting fixtures and fittings, changing out your lights and putting LED in. On that note, I'd say getting a good lighting designer in is worth the weight in gold, because lighting can really make or break a property. And if you want to sell it on, then you really need to create that space, that illusion of space and light. And to do that, you need a good lighting plan or maximise your natural light as best you can. So, so improving from the outside in is the first place I'd start. And then changing all the fixtures and fittings, upgrading those bits and pieces. Flooring is actually a really big thing for me. If you think about it, it's kind of logical, because it's a huge part of your house. It's the biggest expense in your house, and it also gets a huge amount of traffic. So it's really important that you get this right. If you're lucky enough to have bought an older home that's got some original floorboards, and you can just sand those back. You know, if you bought an 1800s, 1900s villa, or 1950s, 40s, 50s bungalow that's likely to be Kauri, Matai, Remu, and they would have been done originally in this sort of oil-based polyurethane, which actually makes the floors very orange and very red over time. You'll be quite surprised if you strip those back and add a 2% white tint into your water-based polyurethane. You'll get a really beautiful contemporary floor that is quite natural and light. And I do believe that natural products do actually help enhance a property's value as well. So keeping everything in natural fibres, it's timeless and never go out. So yeah, the floor is the way you need to invest. Now, the other thing about the floor is if you're in a small property, try not to cut your flooring up with too many break lines. It's best to try and keep it to one or two materials. That just makes your property feel a lot smaller. So if you want to try and create the illusion of space, go for the wide floorboards, put it through all your common areas, and then carpet the bedrooms for warmth. Try not to do... I bought a flip project recently, which was, and this will be an interesting story for later, but it's a 2-year-old house, interestingly, not an old house. And we decided to buy it because it was affordable and I could see the potential in it. But it was a spec home and very kind of... Well, it looked like it had been done in the 1980s, actually. It was pretty badly done. But it had like a square... section of tiles in the entrance. Then it was carpet in the dining room, then another square section of tiles in the kitchen, and then there was something else, and then carpet everywhere else. And to be honest, it was just a mishmash, and it just looked terrible. We pulled it all up, and we put wide timber floors throughout, and it just changed the whole space. It looked clean, contemporary, large, light. It was beautiful. It was all that was needed. So, flooring, choose wisely. Also, every type of floor has a different function and form. So if you're going to rent it out, maybe timber flooring isn't the right thing to do unless you're standing back. But there's some great laminate products out there that will last a lifetime and look just as good as timber and will be just as good when you sell it in 10 years' time. So do talk to the experts, talk to the professionals, get your product knowledge up there before you buy stuff. So, yeah, upgrading kitchens. So if you're on a tight budget, like I said, you don't need to pull the whole kitchen out. If it generally works and you've got enough space, try to reuse the carcass. You can take the cabinet fronts off, respray them, change the handles, make sure you've got enough storage as well. This flip project that we had like one bench and then there was nothing above, just a range hood. There was no space. So we filled in the top with cabinets and an integrated range hood. And we also flipped a cupboard around that was sort of in a bedroom that was kind of on the other side of the kitchen wall and created another sort of bench bar area. Bingo, transformed 10 grand later and it looked like a brand new kitchen. You can change tops as well, add LED lighting underneath cabinets and things like that. And you really don't have to spend a fortune, you just need to be clever. Make sure, first of all, that everything is functional and efficient because that is the key to selling a house, that it has to flow and move easily. what you want is for the buyer to come in and go, there's just something about this house. Not, I'm not sure why I don't like this house. And those are the kind of projects I get, right? That they walk into the space and they're like, it ticks all my boxes, it's got the right number of room, but it just doesn't feel right, and I don't know what it is. And they start fixating on things that they want to change. Usually, it's a lack of efficiency, flow, and light, stagnant energy. So that's what we come in and fix and make sure it all works. So bathrooms are the next things you can upgrade. They can cost up to 20 grand if you do it properly. So be careful about what you do there. Just make sure everything works and it's functional. If you're selling it on, you don't need to go and put in, the top spec vanity and marble tops and, latest shower head. That's money down the drain. You need to make sure it works, and you can pick a medium range price that is equivalent to the market or related to the market that you want to pitch your house at, and that will sell it. As long as it's functional, it's light and it's airy and it makes you feel comfortable in that space, that will sell it. The danger, bringing me on to the sort of final point really, the danger for you guys is emotion. So when you buy your house and you're so excited about renovating it, and it was a part of that original plan of like, I'm going to sell it on 2 years' time. You can get really caught up with the excitement of it all, and you might end up buying this really expensive chandelier or, something else that's quite personal and unique to you, and it won't give your money back. So stay the course, steady the course. Go back to your strategic plan, what you're trying to achieve. Keep to your budget, and ensure that you're not overspending, that you're always keeping things on track. Because, if you just get too emotionally involved, there is a danger of over-capitalizing. So I think the key message for me now, and I'm going to finish here, is plan well, really well, like it was a business, okay? Talk to the professionals. Even I do. I've spent years in study, but I did a lighting lighting design module in my degree, but I don't claim to be a lighting designer, and I always outsource it. The reason why is technology moves so fast that I can't be an expert in everything. So I will go to the experts and I'll ask advice and I'll pull together a strategy for a client. So you guys, go to the experts, speak to people with the product knowledge, pull together the ideas, and make sure it all works for you. So plan, strategize, and keep to budget, and keep your goal in mind, and enjoy it. It's a great process. If you do it well, you will enjoy the journey, and you will get there. You'll get your dream house in Remuera with the pool and everything like that. But start small. Everyone else has done. And build up, part of his business plan. Thank you.